Hi there, I'm John from CNCKing.com, and today we'll make a custom two-sided UV printer jig. Now the tricky thing about two-sided UV printing jigs, or any kind of jig for that matter, is making sure the front matches the back with the vacuum holes of the customer. So in this case here they have a UV printing system, and it's for these cards. So these cards fit in here perfectly, and they had a concern about them not moving around because some UV printers have dryers and other kind of things on them, more industrial based UV printers. So the solution to that is to have holes. But the tricky part about holes is if they don't match the holes on your printer bed, they're basically useless because you have a sealed surface going through a hole, which is just a sealed surface. So that means on the back, what you have to do are channels. Now, the channels have to match the holes. They don't have to match all the holes because a vacuum will equalize itself. But, you know, they have maybe a hole here, a hole here, a hole here, a hole here. As long as you sort of generally have it, you're okay. And everything else equalizes. So what these channels do is they create an area where the whole back of it can equalize to their vacuum system. And the holes here that you see fit perfectly centered with the card holes here. So this means when they're in production, they put this thing in here and it actually should hold perfectly. Perfect tolerance on that one. And they're all, again, perfect tolerance that way as well. But this way, when they're in production, if there's any sort of things that move, they have the vacuum system holding them down a little bit. And the nice thing about this is it's custom fabricated to their needs, which means that, you know, let's say you had a part or something that was a little bit different, you needed deeper, lighter, whatever, we can make that for you just as easily. I've never had too many issues with making something full scale right off the bat. Generally what it is the customer has an idea, sends me a drawing and wants me to make it. And 9 times out of 10, I say, let me do a small little piece just as a prototype, just to make sure everything's okay. And I do that, I ship it to them, and then they review and they say, okay, everything's good, or here's the design change that need to be made. In this case here, we actually did have to do some design changes for the perfect fit, and so the prototype was well worth it. Every once in a while at the shop, I do things because I completely forget about something else. So this is a great example. So these are the prototypes. And there should only be one, but there's actually 2 of them. The difference is this is 0.2, this is 0.02 inches. Now obviously the customer wants this one and not that one. And I didn't realize the mistake until I sent a picture to the customer. I said, you know, here's the prototype coming to your shop. When you get this, double check your spacing, all that kind of normal stuff. And then he says, hang on, that looks kind of deep. And I looked at it and I go, it does look kind of deep. It doesn't look like 0.02, it looks like 0.2. So then I went to the programming that makes all of these things possible. And of course, I was 1 decimal point off. So these kind of things happen every once in a while, and it makes me understand how, you know, NASA, you know, crashes spaceships into planets and asteroids and stuff when they go from metric to empirical and a whole bunch of little units. Because you spend so much time, you know, over very small details that when you actually see it, the brain doesn't realize the mistake right off the bat. Now the funny thing is, I actually used digital calipers to check the depth of this, and it showed 0.2, but your brain realizes that it has to be 0.02, so your brain actually fools you and you assume, you know, when you see it, it doesn't register that it's 0.2, it registers that it's 0.02, which is what this should be. So your brain is always lying to you, and sometimes you catch it and sometimes you don't. But that's why it's important to do prototypes. It's not just for the customer to check the fit, in this case here for their UV printer, but it's also for me, the programmer and the manufacturer of it, just to double check that what I did and what I assume is actually correct and works for the customer. Now it's time to actually make the entire project to make sure everything's flat and parallel and square and everything else. I always clean up the table first for a project like this, especially with UV printers because their tolerances are pretty tight when it comes to the distance between the printer head and whatever they have underneath it they are printing. So by doing this, as you see here, I guarantee that the gantry is completely parallel to the sacrificial board. And then what I do is I put the sheet of MDF on there, and then I go ahead and do the work, and I know everything's going to be totally parallel to everything else. So that's how you get something very nice and accurate. Now the first part of this that it sort of flew through pretty quick was the channels on the backside, and that's so that the vacuum can go all the way through and build up a vacuum so that when they put the cards on top, they don't go flying off. Now generally they don't want to go flying off. I haven't had too many issues with that as well, but sometimes some printers have nozzles that shoot air, stuff like that, and sometimes what happens is the piece can get dislodged. Especially for things like this that are small little plastic cards, they're very sensitive. We've made other things like big metal part jigs and that kind of stuff, and that's not an issue whatsoever. So for that, we don't even bother making channels underneath. There's no purpose to it. It doesn't hold the part down. The weight of the part actually holds the jig down, which is a nice way to do UV printing if you get those kind of contracts. So what takes a long time is making all the cards. The distance is 0.02 inches, so it's almost nothing. It's basically the thickness of a credit card. And what we're doing is we're cutting all of the pockets out over it. And the last step from this whole thing is actually doing the holes. I could mix and match however process I want. So if I want, I could do the holes first and then do this. But what you want to do is maintain vacuum even on my system here. And the best way to do that is do the holes afterwards. And what I'm doing to maintain vacuum is actually just putting some tape over all the holes. Just sucks it right down, make sure everything stays totally flat during production, especially when I'm cutting them out, because that's where it's very important. So you might be wondering why we have these channels on the front, because obviously they're not part of the vacuum system. They're actually to help to remove the cards. So the card fits in here absolutely perfectly, and again, it holds itself in. And what you do is you just put your finger and you can pull it out that way. Other things we've done in the past are tabs. So little things, just so you can put your finger in just to grab it off. Of course, you want to do that after you turn the vacuum off. Otherwise, probably your fingernail's coming off. Don't ask me how I know that. And these channels here are just going one way. Don't really need to have channels going both ways, although if you needed that, it's not a problem. There's absolute total flexibility as to how the jig is fabricated. In this case here, 3/4 inch, it's a nice solid heavy jig. But if you wanted something to be, say, 1/4 inch, that's possible as well. But something you have to keep in mind, the thinner the jig is, yes, technically the easier it is for the vacuum system to sort of suck it down. But it's also a little more flimsy when you carry stuff. So if you have all of this filled with cards, and let's say you had a 1/8 jig made like this here, as soon as you lift it, all the cards are flying off. So having a solid jig like this is actually really good and really nice, because you can work on one table, load one, unload the other, and then put the cards in and carry it over and not be too concerned about all the cards sort of flying out on you. So if you're looking for custom jigs, contact me at CNCKing.com. We'll make them for you and ship them right to your door.